Hey guys, new series here. It's going to be the Total Tactics football podcast. This is where Mehdi and I will take more deep dives into certain teams, less of a kind of tactical play-by-play approach, and more of just laid-back discussion. We're going to talk about the transfer season and the kind of impacts on the squads that we've seen in the Premier League so far, how it's played out, with teams playing 3 to 4 games, and what the kind of projection for our top teams are outside of the top 4 finishing teams last season. So our picks today are going to be Everton, Aston Villa, and Tottenham. Obviously, Tottenham had a strong finish at the end of last season, finishing sixth considering their very poor early form. But in Villa and Everton, we have two teams that didn't make a great case for themselves in the previous season, but have started the Premier League wonderfully and have also backed themselves, through the transfer window.
You're right. For me, I think we should start off with Aston Villa. I think maybe they might have sneakily had the best transfer window. Actually, we were talking about this before. They kept all their players that they wanted to, right? And on top of that, added a keeper. I feel like who could have played for most of the top sides in the English, I think, team right now. Chelsea could have done with him in Emi Martinez. They brought in Ross Barkley on loan, Ollie Watkins, the striker from the Championship, Traore from Lyon, and Matty Cash from Nottingham Forest. Fran, how do you feel these players are going to improve this Aston Villa side, and what do they bring? Like, who's your best out of these bunch?
I think Martinez has already kind of started perfectly, especially in the first game, saving a penalty. But when we watched him in the post lockdown, given the fact that we had very limited chances of seeing him in an Arsenal kit beforehand, he played fantastically. And it wasn't just the kind of fact that he was good at passing out of the back, which is I think a slight upgrade that he had just personally over Leno, but just he was making miraculous saves, and I think his frame, he's so tall as well and so composed in terms of positioning. He was making these fingertip saves, and he just seems to me the type of keeper who makes very few mistakes and just very reliable, which I think is what Aston Villa need, given the fact that they have a great centre back pairing in Mings and Konsa.
No, I mean, I think Emmy is going to be a great addition. He's just so composed. But for me, I feel like out of all the other players as well, Ross Barkley might have a sort of he might be able to rejuvenate his career playing for Aston Villa. We saw how great he was for Everton. He has the ability to drive the ball, has an eye for a goal. I feel like sometimes in the Chelsea setup, maybe he just never really got that, sort of the belief from the manager. And with the positions and sometimes things he was asked to do were not, ideal. Here, he played in that number 10 role against Liverpool on the weekend. And we know how the game went, right? Obviously, it's not because of just the Liverpool players or the Aston Villa players. It was a mad game. To be fair, but I do feel like with what he brings is he makes those late runs into the box. He has the ability to interchange with Grealish, drop a little deeper, with McGinn, be able to pass in exchange, and he's got that physicality to be able to just carry the ball. And I feel that is a very important thing to add to your team because the Premier League is now so competitive as it was before, but each team is they're learning from their mistakes. They're all adding players that are actually making a difference. We've got too many teams competing for the top 10, and I feel with Aston Villa, maybe a lot of people weren't convinced that at the end of the last season they survived the relegation. But I mean, the owners backed them. They got in the money. They haven't lost a single player in the team, and this is how you build a squad. This is how you trust the manager. Okay, we know he's got it in him. They did well in the championship when they came in, and now you gave him the funds to bring in the right players so he can express themselves and actually compete with the teams in the middle half.
No, I agree. I think like just in terms of the way Ross Barkley has played, I think classically is considered as a box to box player, but I think he has very little defensive attributes. He has very good work rate in terms of, you know, making these offensive bombarding runs, which is reminiscent of a box to box midfield. But I think when you place him in the 10 position, he can kind of still press defensive mid player, which would have been Fabinho in the Liverpool game, and that was a perfect instance of that, as opposed to playing slightly deeper into the field and marauding in. I think he plays much better in that 10 position. I think it's great that Dean Smith has identified a position for him. And it's also, I mean, credit to the fact that, Grealish can play in so many positions for Aston Villa, because he right now still occupies that kind of left wing position, which he's a fantastic creator within. And ultimately, the team still very much relies on, I think, his kind of creative prowess. But the fact that they've signed him for 5 years means that there is now at least a kind of framework to build around. And it's great that they've identified, Grealish to be the kind of like key transfer that they made. And Aston Villa, obviously, as you mentioned, having those two billionaire owners means that they can continue to spend the money. And the Premier League money coming in means that they no longer have to worry about relegation, given that they kind of escaped from it last year. And we've already seen the rewards of signing someone like Matty Cash, who played practically every game for Nottingham Forest last season and was considered, within the team of the season as a right back player, in a position that is so kind of depth ridden in England. But he looks fantastic, on both ends of the pitch. And I think in terms of Aston Villa, perhaps the only position to look at going forwards, given the fact that they have Watkins now as a striker, is probably in target and eventually looking for an option away from him.
No, you're right. I mean, they bought Wesley last season from Club Brugge, I believe, but it hasn't turned out really well for him. I feel like that's also very important, because you need the goals in the game. Yes, the defense they're starting to solidify a little bit. It's the goals that get you out, get you out of the trouble. And at times when your team isn't scoring, it can be daunting, because it's very competitive. And Ollie Watkins, he had a good start. I feel like scoring, the amount of goals he scored against Liverpool, that really boosts your confidence. You can say whatever it is. I mean, Aston Villa could have, some people they can say they got lucky, but I feel when you have such a great start, to the season, you're they're sitting on the table second. I mean, they have a game in hand at the moment, and at the same time, you're starting to gel. The players are gelling in. I feel Ollie Watkins, like, wonderful season in the championship last season, 25 goals, 2 assists, and 46. Even if he scores half of that, I feel that is a great start, a great debut season in the Premier League. And we know how competitive it's like. Players like Danny Ings have done really well for Southampton. Calvert-Lewin is doing really well for Everton. Maybe Ollie Watkins, incorporate in the squad, getting the time and the trust, and he's got the service from behind. You've got Jezzachet, you've got Grealish, you've got Barkley, that. And if you just trust the player, he's in the right age, he's 24, moving into his prime, I think they could have a solid acquisition in that forward department, and he might impress a lot of people for me.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about Watkins as well is he always tries to look to place a shot, even if it's from range. And it's not just about the fact that he has off the ball positioning, but he can clearly contribute in terms of him having a great first touch, and his ability to kind of take a shot from a very smooth first touch is very evident. And I think you could see that in the second goal, when he kind of turned Joe Gomez aside, regardless of the fact that Gomez had a poor night. It's ultimately the fact that I think top strikers will always look for these pockets of space. And I think with Watkins, it's more about having the ball, and he enjoys, and he will get that ball, as you say, just given the fact that they have creators. But I think, sorry.
No, I also like, sorry to interrupt there. I also like that he's able to actually move from his position as well. And that kind of brings that element of surprise, don't you think?
No, I agree with that. So, like, I mean, you can see, like, for example, he carries the ball from the left-hand side on that second goal, which I'm going to mention again. And it's just a clear instance where I think the modern striker has to play alongside his teammates and support them in ways at times. And for example, in the defensive transition, has to support the plays and to support the pressure. And then eventually he also has to find himself in the box, which is what he did for the other goals, right? So you can see when Aston Villa collapsed that kind of Liverpool high line, especially when they're kind of lazing off on the set piece. He is always making that kind of offensive run when he has to, but in terms of the defensive kind of transition to offense, he is supporting the teams and creating these defensive blocks as they try to transition.
Oh, that's right. So, I mean, if we're going to be rating Villa's transfer window, what would you rate it out of 10?
Honestly, I'd rate it probably an 8. I think, in fairness, they haven't had that many transfers, and that might be just given the fact that they spent so much last season. I think Bertrand Traore, it's still to be seen because I think he hasn't had the greatest of years in Ligue 1. He hasn't really developed too well from the 17-18 season, and I think he's the kind of dark horse in the sense where it'll be interesting to see how he performs in the Premier League. We saw, for example, a player like Pepe coming in, had a little bit of a rough start, but clearly is a PL kind of proven player, I think. And obviously, Pepe was much more highly rated, and I think you could compare maybe the difficulties as well with Traore there. And ultimately, however, they still have two brilliant defensive signings. And if you look at Aston Villa last season, they were really struggling with set pieces. I'm not saying Manny Cash will help with that, but certainly Emi Martinez will.
No, that's absolutely right. So I feel Aston Villa could, for me, break into the top 9. I know it sounds a bit critical at the moment, but I feel like this season's a long way to go. But they've started off really well, and if they can push this on, maybe even the European spot. You never know. So, Fran, moving on to our next team. This is the hot team right now. This is the one everyone's talking about. This is right now the Premier League leaders, if I may just say. It's Everton, Carlo Ancelotti's Everton, and what a transfer window they have had. What has impressed you the most? I mean, besides James, of course.
I think it's Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He obviously isn't part of the transfer signings, but it's just more the fact that he's taken this transformative turn under Carlo Ancelotti, and it's clear that he has many different qualities as a player. You can see him, I mean, scoring that fantastic goal versus Tottenham, a clear physical attribute where he is very dominant, very aerially strong as well. But just the fact that if you watch him play on the team, he offers a lot in terms of being a target man when they don't have the ball as much. That was, I think, quite the case when they were, trying to secure their lead versus Brighton. He would very much be a great hold-up option to try and delay the game as much as possible. And also his off-the-ball movement is fantastic. Oftentimes he finds ways to kind of be on side and make these runs alongside runs that Richarlison will make, or ultimately be a set piece threat. But he also offers a lot in terms of defense, in terms of breaking up plays on the wings, which is something that Everton need to do now. You'll see, for example, Doucouré and James and Coleman on the right, and usually Calvert-Lewin, Digne, and Richarlison on the left. Obviously, Richarlison is injured right now, but ultimately the same kind of role will be taken on by someone like Iwobi. And I think Calvert-Lewin's ability to move in different areas of the field and his kind of additional kind of physical threats makes him almost a complete striker. But, form is form. We have to still see whether he's able to carry this form through.
I mean, he's not even a transfer, but he's already our favorite out of the bunch. I mean, the one thing what really impressed me about him is his XGs from last year. He manages to actually, he didn't overperform or underperform. He did exactly what was required. And this season, adding the new signing James to it, he's getting the chances, the balls, the passing, and he's someone who seems to be, if you give him the chance, if you give him the support, you will get goals out of him. And that's a trust from the manager. That's just the player's own belief in his own abilities. And what else? What will make you feel better when you have a player like James Rodriguez in there just behind you, giving you that support? You know that the balls are going to be perfect. We know James's ability to score and to create. He's a world-class player who's had, played for the likes of Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, performed so well in the World Cup. I don't need to tell anyone about James Rodriguez, but I feel to be able to secure him for what, £20 million, according to the Guardian, I think that might be one of the steals of the transfer market. I mean, we have Alan for 22.5, Rodriguez for 20, Doucouré for 20, Ben Godfrey 20. Add that all together, that's 80 million. Kai Havertz, as you were mentioning, cost 72. In a sense, Everton went out there, they got the players that they feel, make that big difference, who are going to hit the ground running. These aren't young players either, barring Godfrey, that is. But it was exactly what Ancelotti needed. They lacked that creative, that sparks, a player that can link that the offense, like the midfield and the attack together. And James Rodriguez is the absolute perfect mix. You've seen him play before in Real Madrid. How do you feel like what you're seeing now is different, and maybe what he's bringing, what we know that he could bring?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think when you watch James in his early years in Real Madrid, especially with the Carlo Ancelotti season, he played fantastically as a 10, and subsequent to that, he started to play within the 4-3-3 structure of either Zidane or some other coaches as well, who opted to go for this model because of the kind of trident trio of Kroos, Modric, and Casemiro. And ultimately, I think James is much better when he gets to play in these more advanced positions. And within the Everton system, they play a mix of a 4-2-3-1 and a 4-3-3, and he gets to be unlocked a lot more. He has much less defensive duties. And is covered by Doucouré in that sense, who once again is another transfer who will be integral to the team in terms of providing this kind of offensive and defensive work rate. So when we compare back to Barkley, as I made as an example, he loves to make these bombarding runs, but he doesn't do the same thing on defense, even though he has the same sort of intensity. Doucouré is very well aware of how to mask, for example, maybe the lack of defensive positioning of James, and that obviously enables James. And for me, I think not to say that James was not a great centre mid, but just I think there was a clear preference within Real Madrid to kind of stick with Kroos and Modric, given the fact that they have the pedigree of winning. And I think it was just an unfortunate circumstance, but the talent was always there, because if you actually look at his expected goals and expected assist numbers, in terms of expected goal creation, he was always up there in the tops in terms of at least creating one goal creating chance a game. That was even with minimal play time in both Bayern and Real Madrid in those kind of mixed stints. And for me, I think here in Everton, he gets to be the kind of main playmaker, and he also is kind of fit in with the manager who understands how to make the most out of him. And ultimately, that's what you need in a football team.
Oh, no, absolutely. He just has the belief, right? Like he's the confidence, the love there that the Everton fans are giving him so much love, as is pretty much the rest of the league as well. He's been welcomed in. I feel like, he's starting to feel the importance that he knows that he deserves in a sense. And I feel some players need that nurturing, guidance. And Real Madrid is such a big club. And it's not that he's a Don or someone else wouldn't give him. It's so much more demanding. And sometimes a player needs to decide, well, where they are in their stage of their career, and this move is, I think, an excellent one. Moving on to Alan, the destroyer, or the man who's sitting in the deep pocket, sort of, linking that defense with the midfield, able to recycle the ball. I think he's been superb. We know he's done really well with Napoli, in Napoli under Ancelotti before, you can say, and he did play under Ancelotti, right?
No, he did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Another player is, familiar with the way Ancelotti would ask him to play. Um, I think his leadership in the back kind of settles and relaxes players like Mina and Keane. And I think that's something that we couldn't say about Everton before. The last few seasons, that Schneiderlin and that Gomez, who's again another starter in the team right now, but they didn't have that sort of leader and like a rock in that midfield to kind of give you that ease of mind, and to be able to find a player. If someone, let's say Mina, gets the ball, Alan always finds space for that player to be an outlet, so that they can move the ball to him and he passes it forward to either Decore or um, Gomez. And I feel like that skill right there, right? You're talking about, holding the game, controlling and dominating them. You need to be a player who's not going to be put under pressure. He's not going to be someone who's just going to break tackles and just lob the ball forward. You want him to be composed, someone who can, put a stamp uh, on the match. And the way, we've seen with his work rate, we've seen with his how much distance he covers. He's everywhere. And he's doing all this role alone. He's got Decore to support him on one side, as we mentioned, Gomez, who's like now again after his injury and stuff, he's playing at the best of his abilities. That midfield three really provides that balance for the front four, and I feel that Alan is the quintessential important player that you need for that midfield to work and to enable James Rodriguez.
Yeah, and I think the team has also taken towards this new structure that Ancelotti has created. We did obviously do like a tactical analysis on the most recent game where Alan wasn't present, and we saw Delft and Davies playing that more kind of supportive role. But I think what I like the most about Alan is he really likes to marshal the players. You'll see at times where, for example, if Doucouré is too offensively positioned, he will always tell Doucouré to stand back to cover these kind of gaps, and he is very well aware of the field. And that's the kind of thing that I think Everton have always kind of missed. Just these kind of errors leading to goal, something that's always happened. I think we've always seen Everton kind of slip with their leads. This season, of course, we've seen instances where they have the chance to, but haven't done so far. And I think that is what the sort of defensive leadership Alon brings to a team that is important and integral to this Everton side. And I mean, talking about errors leading to goal, I think Pickford is obviously a part of the problem. Unfortunately, even though he does a fantastic saves and fantastic games at times, I think a keeper, in my view at least, should be someone who makes less errors and isn't ultimately the reason why a game should be won or lost. So if you, for example, look at De Gea's kind of miraculous seasons, I think those were kind of outliers in terms of how we look at goalkeeping. Maybe Courtois at Real Madrid is doing the same there, but ultimately, you want a keeper who keeps clean sheets by making few mistakes. And I think miraculous saves are less of a priority. And therefore, I think Everton has made a sensible move to go for a loan with Robin Olsen. And I like the fact that it's also supported by the Ben Godfrey signing because Godfrey is a young centre back. And we have seen at times, Mina, for example, make mistakes. We've seen teams press Mina, and he's not so good at that. He is very aerially dominant. I mean, he can score goals from headers, but he also does struggle when it comes down to individual man marking and pressing. And perhaps Godfrey could be a replacement in line, or at least someone to kind of keep him on his toes.
I like Godfrey. Godfrey is a player who's who's played under Daniel Farke. He's also a possession based player. He's someone who's good on the ball, and he's quite young. He's only 22. He's got a high ceiling, and as you mentioned, it's great for Mina and Keane to have a good competition. Someone they know that okay, if they don't perform well or if they're going to be causing problems, they'll have someone replacing them, and it's 20 million. I feel that Godfrey has a high potential, as a ceiling. Potentially is English, that adds to the transfer market as well and resale value. And it's I think it's a great acquisition. But I feel just before that, I would like to also mention how well they've done in moving some of these players out. We've seen Walcott go back to Southampton, player who's passed that I used to really like Walcott back at Arsenal when he was because of his directness and pace. But once you start losing that, he can't offer Everton what you need, right? And maybe not even off the bench, he's not as effective as Everton would have hoped. They moved Moise Keane to PSG on loan. These are wages that they need to get off the books. They moved Sandro Ramirez was released. Omar Niassi was sent out. Schneiderlin was sold. Stecklenburg was let go. I feel in part of with the whole bringing in the players, I feel the Everton board is also structuring well. They've done really well in moving the players out that they would be paying wages to who won't play. It's just a burden on the books. It's a very smart way of moving. Ancelotti is going to be there for a few years. They can build a team. They can start, recruiting smartly. This Godfrey, Godfrey, Decore. These are smart signings. Players who you're gonna have in the squad for a while, and you're gonna be using. You don't want to get in players like Moise Keane. They spent what, more than 30 million on him, and he hasn't even had the chance to play well. And I just feel like he hasn't settled in to the Premier League. And these are the kind of signings you can't afford to do because it's still a lot of money. And let's say they put like they were hoping last season, or they put in Moise Keane. Thankfully for Everton, Dominic Calvert-Lewin is just not going to be leaving that spot anytime soon. But those funds could be used in other departments which are really important. And I feel like looking at this season, the transfers, Everton might be learning from their mistakes, and they could be moving. It would be more smarter. They've spent over 40 million on Sigurdsson before, and now you got Hamas for 20. That's what I would call smart business. That's what when a club is like thinking smartly. They know what identifying the targets beforehand, what Ancelotti needs, and I feel like Ancelotti is also a great pull because the player would be willing to play under a Champions League winning coach.
Again, obviously, that was the key kind of sign for both James and Alan, who mentioned their wish to kind of link up with Ancelotti again. And, it is a fantastic story for them. But as you say, I think Everton have made a lot of these signings in recent years where you question the amount of money spent into players. I mean, even though Iwobi could have a good game out last weekend, the kind of money put on him is definitely something that I think fans have questioned. And
Yeah.
the fact that they've actually stepped up with while spending a similar amount of money, albeit obviously in a period where obviously a lot of teams were cash strapped, is fantastic. I think Everton, for me, are obviously the clear winners of the transfer window, just given the fact that they've spent 80 million and probably upgraded, three positions on the pitch at least in Alana, James, Rodriguez, and Doucouré, and then have two players who could potentially usurp both Pickford and either one of the centre backs. I mean, we spoke about Mina previously. I think Michael Keane is a fantastic player. I think he's got brilliant vision and range. When you watch him, for example, that kind of pass to the West Ham game in the cup game, and then also just in general his kind of distance passing, usually to the fullbacks. And I think in that kind of possession system, clearly Ancelotti wants to play with a side that can retain the ball well. And I think ultimately it's about making these smart moves in the future to probably kind of create depth now and continue to phase out the kind of dead wood in the squad. And I think, this season, whatever happens with Everton, I think, provided that they don't have furthering injuries or that the injuries aren't as severe, I think they can easily make it to a European spot. And I mean, obviously, top four is maybe still a bit of a reach for now to kind of say, but given the fact that a lot of their competition has struggled so far, and points are so important when you secure them early on in the season. You can see how, for example, people thought that last season would have been a two-horse race the whole time, despite the fact that Liverpool didn't drop any points, and ultimately what it led to was the fact that that point gap just was never lost. 12 points is a massive kind of haul to have at the beginning. And I think there's no reason for this Everton team to run out of form. And they just have to keep continuing with what they're doing. And clearly, all the players seem to love playing under Carlo.
I'm just waiting to see how they do against tough oppositions. We've got the
Mm-hmm.
Merseyside derby coming in, and that is the testament of, to see what this qualities this team is like, what their mental capacity is. Can they, if let's say they beat Liverpool, can they continue that hot streak? It's a long way to go, but so far they've ticked all the boxes. They've done so well, and I think you can't fault that, because that's also important. You gotta give them credit where it's due. Teams that have done super well. And next up is Tottenham Hotspurs. Man, I mean, we saw Gareth Bale making his way back to the Premier League. I guess you just won't have enough time to play golf anymore. But how impressed? I mean, what you've seen him play for for Real Madrid? You've seen the issues surrounding him with his injuries, maybe the dip in form. What can we expect from him?
I actually think it can go both ways, to be honest. For me, I think, as a Real Madrid fan myself and someone who was sad to see, I think, Bale go, especially in the kind of environment, I think, that was created between the kind of tense atmosphere between his agent, the club, and also the fans. I think it was sad. And given the fact that the Spanish press had given him so much in recent years, but it was still once again exacerbated by both sides. And for me, I think just watching him play, he clearly didn't have the same sort of confidence or motivation to play under Zidane, and I think it's completely understandable. I think Bale is the type of player who isn't necessarily like a Ronaldo or Ramos who will try his absolute best to win no matter what. I think he is someone who has achieved the absolute most in football, and therefore his goals are probably a little bit more differently aligned to just winning every game week in, week out, especially when he doesn't have the support behind him. But in Tottenham, he has that. He has a manager who's always wanted to play with him or have the chance to coach him. He has the fans who clamor for him. You can see the kind of reception that he got when he arrived back in London. And I think it's a fantastic kind of homecoming for him. He's obviously nursing off an injury right now, and it still remains to be seen how he copes, on that sort of physical side. There was mention, of course, of him going on some sort of special program. I mean, I feel like a player who constantly gets injuries, it doesn't really change. I think most clubs already have elite medical staff and services, but ultimately you hope that he has a good medical season. I think if that is the case, then ultimately he still provides, I think, a better option than Lucas Moura at times, who is, I think, quite reliant on having the ball.
Mhm.
And I think what Bale provides is someone who, very much like Son, can go into the end of the ball and make a chance out of nothing. And when you have Kane and I think two developing players in both Ndombele and Lo Celso who might eventually be phased in or continue to kind of build on their kind of fantastic form so far, I think then you have a much more offensive counter-attacking team that doesn't necessarily rely on these kind of small interplays that I think Lucas Moura does, and he provides that kind of threat that, if you look at the classic kind of Real Madrid Mourinho team, very kind of fast offensive passes. For example, Kane could be the distributor in a very similar way to Benzema used to be. I think Kane is still a better goal scorer than Benzema, to be honest, even though I'm a fantastic fan of Benzema. But it's just the ability to kind of enable both, let's say, a Bale and Ronaldo, but here we have Bale and Son. And I think
Exactly.
you could actually see a very similar situation with Tottenham this year.
I'm that's exactly the point I wanted to get to, is just the way Kane has been playing this season, and I feel like he wanted to. I think he prefers creating than actually scoring, which is
Yeah.
crazy because he gets 4 assists in one game, but to the same player. Like who does that? No one's done that in the Premier League before, and I think he's got the taste of that. He's dropping deep, and at the same time he gets in those late runs and he scores goals. And if you have Son and Gareth Bale just off him, playing off him in a more inside forward roles, you've got two players who've got incredible long range strikes on them, power, drive, the finish, the physicality. If Bale can keep that up, and adding that midfield. We're talking about Hoiberg as the new addition, and I feel like he's been brought in to be able to give that sort of cover that they sometimes lacked last season. They've been playing with Winks and Sissoko, who Sissoko has that drive, like this monstrous ability to be able to just carry and dominate through. But with his positioning, sometimes leave behind. And Winks was great, but not. He's just someone who hasn't been able to, break through or like actually realize the potential that everyone presumed around him. I feel like he hasn't improved in his career too much. And bringing in Hoiberg to, allowing Dembele and, like you mentioned, Lo Celso, such technically, I really like that player. He's so creative, and Hoiberg gives them that balance. Sometimes dropping in where Doherty goes forward. He's going to be one sometimes providing the width. We know Mourinho always likes to have three people at the back to be able to have, if he's going to allow players to go forward. So if Reguilon goes forward, Doherty's going to stay in, or Hoiberg's going to drop in that right back position with the new fullbacks to Reguilon and Doherty. I think that's just already an upgrade on what they had. Davies was a great player, and you had uh, Danny Rose, who's, I feel, he's back in the squad. I'm not sure he's back in the squad. He hasn't. Has he moved to Newcastle? Is it confirmed? It was right.
I think Danny Rose did not go to Newcastle. No,
He went on loan last
he was
season.
on
Yeah.
loan last season, but he's just not named in the Tottenham squad. I'm
Uh,
not exactly sure if he's actually found a club, to be honest. As far as I'm aware, I think he still plays for Tottenham. But I mean, like, obviously on the other hand side of the pitch, you have Aurier, who's for me still actually a fantastic depth option. And one of the key things that people haven't really kind of taken into account is how much the season is demanding in terms of physicality, and the fact that, for example, Spurs have a team and the depth now with Carlos Vinicius coming in, for example, in games where Kane might not be able to play or might need rest, means that Spurs actually probably have two strong kind of starting 11s to play both cup matches and the Premier League matches. And for me, I think what Reguilon brings is at least an offensive outlet on the left hand side. I think Son very much is isolated at times, waiting for runs because of the fact that he can't really interplay with Davies. I think Davies is a solid, more of like a left center back option at times when he kind of drops into a system and covers, for example, for a bombarding RAA. But Reguilon is someone who actually does both. And I watched him play in Real Madrid, obviously, in the kind of season where he had a breakout um, under Solari. And he played fantastically because his pace allows him to play on both ends of the field, yet he's very good at man marking still. So while he contributes very well to these offensive plays and will still take on these offensive positions, you saw, for example, on the highlight reel or low light reel in a sense, where he kind of runs to chase for Azpilicueta. I mean, just the immense amount of pace. There was also one which was actually more of a highlight reel where I think he runs against, I think it might have been Tammy Abraham, and makes this brilliant recovery. But that sort of pace is, I mean, reminiscent of Bale, for example, when he played in that left back position in Tottenham for me. And I think massive in terms of the kind of tools and what kind of unlocks Mourinho will have. I think Mourinho likes to have a defensive structure, but you still need to be able to move from defense to attack effectively. And in the previous structure, you had a very rigid system where I believe the ball had to be cycled between both Winks and Sissoko, who are both not necessarily the most visionary players, and you don't necessarily have the same outlets on both sides of the fullbacks. Unlike when you compare it to, for example, Liverpool, who can play quite easily from both sides. Now, at least Mourinho has an option to go through both, and I think it's more about understanding each other. So, as you mentioned, when Doherty moves forward, Reguilon has to kind of track back a little bit more, and vice versa. With Højbjerg, for example, maybe covering spaces if Reguilon moves to the left. And I think with Spurs, what shocked me, of course, is that under Daniel Levy, we've managed to see an unreasonable amount of signings, in my opinion, in perhaps one of the most economically kind of destitute windows we would have expected for Spurs. And ultimately, I think they've already kind of started on this kind of embarkation of players that they no longer see fitting within the squad. So we've seen Vertonghen Lee, for example, and we've also seen the kind of loans of players like Ryan Sessegnon and Troy Parrott, who might still have a future in Spurs, but that's still yet to be seen. But now at least that's not their depth. Their depth is clear and is defined and clearly of a level to compete for Spurs to kind of maybe capture a top four spot this season.
Right, and they brought in Joe Hart, and they've got two other goalkeepers in Lloris and Gaziniga. I I don't know how much maybe that was a necessary. I know it's free, but like, how do you feel about that transfer? Maybe do you reckon he might get that chance to reclaim some sort of the reputation that he had in the old days where everyone used to wonder, like when from Man City, he was a great goalkeeper, but I feel with at 33 as well, and I don't see him displacing Lloris anytime. But as a second option, do you see that as maybe uh, not a smart acquisition or?
I think sometimes Mourinho is the type of manager where he likes a little bit of these locker room leaders, and I think Hart might not necessarily even play as a second keeper, but at least is a player within the squad who has experience and an understanding of what it means to win games. And I think, in a sense, that's probably why he actually joined. I don't think he plays any sort of other role in the club. And I'm not necessarily sure of how much wages he's on, but I think that's exactly why he was brought into the team. And I think ultimately his transfer is a little bit inconsequential, I think, in the grand scheme of things for Spurs.
So well, there's that, and I mean, end of the day, I feel this has been a great for me, possibly considering I just want to give a few more games to see. I think Tottenham might have had, in a way, the best transfer window alongside Everton. They're right there. They had a tough game against Newcastle. It was one of those games where nothing was going their
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
and they could see the penalty late on. But I feel they're starting to build momentum. Harry Kane and Son are on it, and Dembele, which is great to see a player who's got quality. You always want to see players, good quality players in the league. He's picking up form. We've heard so many stories of where he's out of the team and he's back in the team. Mourinho doesn't like him. Mourinho does like him, but this is what Mourinho does as well. He pushes players. He wants them to be at their best. He wants them to be performing, to live up to the name. And he's quite brutal when it comes to being honest. And I think to some players it works, and I feel like everyone thought that it might not work with Endeavor, but knock wood, it seems to be something he needed. He needed when he came to the squad, and with the quality players that you have around your leaders, as you're mentioning, Harry Kane, if Hart's in the locker room, Lloris itself, you've got Alderweireld there. That actually pushes the players around you to perform well. Maybe in Dembele's attitude, as sometimes people mention, might not have been the best, but when you have players that are just there to push you and to make you want to do even better. I think that's when you get the best out of each player. And Tottenham has a serious squad, and it's not just like quality players. They're people who are experienced, won trophies, and that's something Spurs have been looking for a long time. So I don't know if they'll get it anytime soon, if they'll be winning anything. Do you reckon they will win something this season? But that's what would you bring in Mourinho for, to win trophies?
No, I agree with that. And I think ultimately, when we talk about transfer window winners, I think the Premier League in itself has spent so much money. I think they've spent collectively roughly 1 billion this window. And when you compare that to the other leagues, for example, La Liga had a net positive in terms of transfers. And that tells you the sign of how much this kind of TV money, and also in a sense a reliance on fans coming back, and I think a bit of an overestimation potentially, or just a risk, that a lot of boards have taken so far, have shown that the Premier League has the money to spend. And I think this was the perfect window in a sense to strengthen your team, because a lot of other teams needed money because they need to balance their books, they need to show at least some signs of profit, or less signs of loss at least. And here you have the Premier League teams at least rating in a sense from the other kind of domestic leagues, or even from their kind of counterparts. And I think in a sense, there's a lot of honorable mentions to be made as well. When we look at teams outside of the top four, but I think, we have clear winners in Aston Villa, in Everton, and in Tottenham.
Now, this is absolutely great, and it's gonna be. We can't wait to be back to the Premier League. Once this international break is over. To some people like it, most people don't. I think we're going to have a great. There's some exciting fixtures coming up, and we'll be there to cover them as much as we can. So just we'd love your feedback. Let us know how you like this podcast, and what you would like us to discuss next time, so we can stay engaged with you guys and give you what you would like to listen to.
All right, thank you guys. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.
Bye.